good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thanks very much for joining us at the Card Analytics webinar. We're going to have the presentation in the middle. Just below that, you have area to ask questions, submit comments, and as we go through, we'll have some poll questions that will also appear below, which you can look at and even put comments on. So let us get started. I'm Kambiz Asrar-Hagigi, and I'm the VP of Product Management here at iNetco. I've been in the analytics space for over 10 years in both retail and the financial sector, and in the software industry close to 20 years now. I'm really excited to talk to you about card analytics and the breadth of all that entails. Also with me, I have my colleague here, Mark Borbis, who will co-present. And Mark, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Kambiz. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark. My role here at iNetco, I've been with the company for about 10 years, and my focus is on a lot of our core enabling technology, what we call the Insight product, which is about our transaction capture. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the operational use cases for that as we go through today's presentation.
Thanks, Mark. So just to give you a little bit of a preview before we get going, we'll talk about data analytics at a little bit of a higher level just to get us started. Get into the card space and some of the trends, challenges, some of the opportunities in that space, talk about the landscape in general, and then we'll get into talking about some analytics in that space and go through some examples from an operational perspective, some business drivers, risk avoidance, and then we'll open it up to some questions. Let's start off a little bit on the lighter side with some necessary Dilbert to get us going. In all the busy lives, the whole point is to make things easy. So here we have the Dogbert consult in all his infinite wisdom telling the CEO, you need a dashboard application to track your key metrics. That way you'll have more data to ignore when you make your decisions based on company politics. CEO, of course, the most important question, will the data be accurate? And okay, let's pretend that matters. So let's face it, I mean, this has absolutely no shred of reality. This could never happen in the real world. But still, at the same time, it does touch on some really interesting terminology. You have dashboard in there, you have metrics, you have the question of data validity, all things that play a really big part in the constant conversation around data and analytics. So let's dive into that a little bit and take a look at analytics as a whole, the evolution of it, the evolution of data, where things have come, where they're going. And if you try to unbundle that a little bit, it's actually made up of three different streams, if you will. And if we just move up the chain, we've kind of separated it up into a descriptive portion, call that stage one, or progression, and then predictive, and then prescriptive. And in each of those, you have different capabilities and functionalities throughout in that kind of continuum. So if we were looking on the data curve, you'd see we had store and retrieve data, then relational databases and data cubes. As we got more data, we wanted to access it differently, then big data warehousing, then to enterprise data-driven applications, and now we have the big data, but we also are on the convergence of fast data. You want this to be real-time streaming. You want to be able to look at this transactional information on the fly, always available. And if we move up to the analytics curve on that, you have, again, the same kind of progression. You had minimal analysis. It was really rear view mirror driving and looking at the data that you have. Some sort of historical analysis came after that. Forecasting and trending along that line, and more information and getting predictive algorithms and modeling. And where we're going definitely is making things simpler, using machine learning techniques, artificial intelligence, to really make it prescriptive and really assist us in those decision-making processes. And then on the visualization continuum, because all these things play hand in hand, we have the standard ad hoc reporting, got static dashboards, interactive dashboards. Now with just the web and where it's come and all the online apps and the dashboards and tools that you have, on-demand dashboards are becoming part of each and every application that we really interact with. And that's only going to get more accessible and usable and user-friendly. So descriptive, predictive, prescriptive, it's important because we're going to jump into a poll question right after this. Let's see where we feel we are on this continuum. Let me turn this on here. So you should have a poll appear right under the slides over there that shows the same continuum and a choice. Where do you feel you are on this analytics maturity continuum, and what do you classify yourselves as? I think in our interactions, Mark, we've seen people all across the board on this.
We have, yeah. There's always a lot of people starting, their journey. Really, they're just doing basic reporting and consuming those reports, and some have kind of committed to having more of an analytics tool. We'll talk about it later, but we often see scarcity of data and things like that being some of the key issues. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where people land up.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm interested to see where the votes come in. As they're coming in, we'll give it another 45 seconds or so to get everyone coming in and take a look. We can pull up the results and where things stand. So 57% so far on the descriptive side. And still some more votes coming in as we speak. Give it another 20 seconds. See any further votes coming in. And in fact, what we'll do is leave this poll open underneath the slides until we get to the next poll question. So as you're trying to decide where you fit on that, you'd be able to come back and vote on this, and we'll go back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, lion's share of people at that descriptive phase for sure.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let me go back to the slides here. All right, so now diving into cards a little bit more and bringing that back to where cards fits into the equation. So the first 8,000 years weren't that exciting. We had trading, we had the invention of money, and then come the 1950s is where the first cards started to appear. But really the last 20 years is where things have been moving and shaking. We've had 1994 online banking and payments appear. 1998 PayPal came onto the scene. Today they have hundreds of billions of transactions a year. Right about now we're getting everything's, I put near future there just because everything's happening so quickly that all those dates really just meld into one, with people moving to mobile and online transactions more and more instead of cards. You have other outside forces also playing a part with retailer mobile wallets, like Starbucks and Walmart have really stood out in that effort. You have technologies, blockchain type technologies that are going to come in and really disrupt and affect this technology, this medium as well. Social money from people like Facebook and Twitter purchases and change tip to microfinancing and retail financing. There's just so much going on so quickly that just this landscape moving forward is going to be even more granular. It's going to change very, very quickly. And what that means, though, what that means for the card processing in general is really that transaction data is everywhere. It comes in from all sorts of sources, comes in from all sorts of devices through the different channels, whether it be ATM, mobile, point of sale. And then as the cards network, as a purview to that, it's actually a pretty holistic omni-channel view when you start to see where all the data comes from and where all the aspects feed in. So in addition to all this data, all these changes, some of the technological aspects that have been coming up are really interesting. One of our clients I spoke to recently said, we have 3-year plans nowadays because anything after 3 years is static. There's no way of knowing what's going to happen after that, and try and keep an eye on just the immediate future. And new technologies are coming up are available today, but contactless cards, EMV chips, the mobile wallets, wearable technologies, all fast and furious. And at the same time, alongside it, the threat of fraud is ever more present. People have a much more higher expectation of security on it, and trying to keep a grip on those things becomes more and more difficult. There's an experiment in France, for example, where there is a new technology called motion code, where the 3-digit CVV code on the back of the card is actually replaced with a mini screen, which displays a code that changes automatically at regular intervals, just making it all the harder for people to be able to figure what that code might be. There's a couple of financial institutions right now trying a proof of concept on that. So many things that are going to be attempted and tried, and we'll just have to see how it pans out and where it goes. But with all this data, with all this information, there's also higher transaction volumes. You have the risk of performance bottlenecks. You have the higher expectations from the customers, higher cost to actually educating some of the customers in terms of some of the offerings and what's being provided. And then regulation, as always, is costing us more money, even if it's indirect, but it still has an impact on everything that we do. So before we go on, I'll bring us to our second poll question. We'll close out the first one here. And just with all the information we've seen, some of the challenges, we just talked about technological trends and challenges. The question here is, what do you see as the industry's biggest challenges? So transition to EMV, driving mobile wallet adoption, accessing timely customer behavior data, segmenting my card base, and you can again put your comments in the question box below. Now, we only get 5 options in this poll question. We started off with a list of 15, so by all means, if there's other ones you want to put in, do so.
That was interesting. On this end, we actually don't see the poll updates in real time. They update every few seconds, so we're kind of following along as you go. Looks like there's a preference towards mobile wallet, but it's just traded positions there with timely customer data. So we'll wait till a few more results come in and see what shows up here.
I guess the timely customer data is in line with what we saw with the previous poll, showing that a lot of people feel they're in the descriptive stage.
Yep.
That's got a lot to do with having the right data. Hopefully it's accurate, and being able to pull it all together. So
that's a good point. Yeah, that is consistent. It's always nice when they're consistent. All right. Well, why don't we leave this one open, and then we'll shift to the next slide. It looks like so far we've kind of got a tie between B and C roughly as we go along.
And we've heard that a number of times as well in terms of mobile being the biggest trend and biggest initiatives in the card space right now.
Well, it's so interesting because it's a trade-off to some degree on fee side. You may get more card usage, but if you're using someone else's mobile wallet, you're also paying a fee to the provider of that wallet, Apple Pay, for instance. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's a tricky one to manage effectively. While those results are coming in, I'll make a couple of comments if we see anything that changes dramatically. What I wanted to talk about, though, is that there's this really interesting paradox in the card analytics space from the conversations that I've had, which is your strategy is actually, I don't want to say simple, but it kind of is simple, which is you want to increase your wallet share, you want to increase usage because usage drives revenue. You want to deliver new products and services because that helps you acquire new customers, that helps with the first piece. And you want to reduce fraud losses because that improves your bottom line. And so the strategy when we go from bank to bank is pretty darn consistent here. It's the execution of that strategy that tends to be very complicated. And so when you look behind the scenes, first of all, you've got all the business pressures and technology pressures that Kambiz has talked about. But then when you get to your own knitting, you've got to deal with the fact that you've got multiple platforms potentially that this data lives in. You've got multiple card products, and it's sliced and segmented, and it doesn't all come in one place. When we saw the early poll results about a lot of people being in that descriptive phase, data latency is a pretty big issue here, where you get your reports on what's happened, and potentially they're weeks or months behind the curve in terms of the questions that you're trying to answer. And so you're always looking in the rearview mirror, trying to forward manage a portfolio. We've heard from a lot of customers that they really struggle to be able to segment the data properly or get the right number of characteristics or dimensions that they need in order to really deliver a one-on-one or at least a very segmented marketing campaign out to customers and get the right customers onto the right cards and the right promotions in front of them. I think we saw this on the poll question earlier, where the tools themselves tend to be very cumbersome. They can be really hard to work with this data. You have to invest a lot of your own time and effort and energy into it, and you end up being an Excel jockey. And then at the end of the day, there's only, in most banks I deal with, a few people who are really responsible for the P&L on the card portfolio. So we're dealing with limited resources, both on the technology side and on the analytics side. And so you've got a simple strategy here, but executing it is really complicated. And so what we really want to spend the rest of the webinar talking about is trying to make that execution piece simpler. So with that in mind, I think what we're all trying to achieve is a holistic view of the customer, because once we see this customer from all dimensions, then we can really optimize the card portfolio to best suit that customer. And there's three dimensions to that. There's the operational dimension, keeping it all running, making sure authorizations work the way that they should, and really that they're fast, they're quick, and that there's no reason technically for the customer not to use our card. The second piece is the business side, which is really how do we incent the customer to use our card more often? How do we increase wallet share? How do we deliver new products and services? And how do we understand what those should be? And the third sort of use case for getting this holistic customer view is on the security and risk side, and really understanding what's good, what's bad, and being able to understand that in a timely manner so you can take action on it. We've seen some fairly high-profile card breaches as well as ATM-related card incidents recently, and these all fit in that security and risk bucket. So what we'll talk about and show in the next few slides is essentially how customer analytics and card analytics can help you in each of these three areas. And I'll start off with the operational side and then hand back to Kambiz to talk through the business and security side. So from an operations side, cards tend to be very complicated. They're high-velocity transactions. You've got a lot of them moving. You often have different platforms that are processing these. Part of it may be outsourced. Part of it may be insourced. There's there's all sorts of different flavors that I see out there. But the first piece is gaining this. You want to, from an operations standpoint, be able to get one-stop visibility into the card system performance. And this is something that we're able to enable, which is regardless of how that card processes, which platform it's on, which type of product, debit versus credit, we can give you a view into your transaction rates, your failure rates, where you may be encountering slowdowns. We can track in real time any type of entry mode dimensions of the transaction. So for instance, if you're making an EMV transaction or transition and you're seeing a lot of cards step down to card swipe, you can understand whether that trend is increasing, and you can drill down and find out where and how and who's responsible. The second element is being able to really understand your performance across different card types. Most of us have different cards in our portfolio. Perhaps you have two distinct brands. Perhaps you have a number of different segments within a brand. But being able to understand how each of your card products is performing is really important, especially if you have customers who are carrying more than one of your cards in their wallet, because it's going to be pretty important to them that they get a consistent experience across that. Extend this out to mobile wallets, for instance. You want to be able to know, am I delivering similar performance for a mobile wallet-enabled transaction as I am for a traditional swipe transaction, as I am for an EMV transaction, as I am for online? You get the picture. Now, it's all well and good to be able to look at dashboards, and you kind of go back to the Dilbert comic at the beginning, and sometimes I think we love designing dashboards, but we perhaps don't actually look at them anywhere near as often as we'd like to. And so one of the things that we believe is really important is having a system that can alert you when there's something that you really do need to pay attention to. So to be able to set up business rules and say, I'm interested in when my EMV step-down rate goes up above 2% at any particular point in my network. That's interesting. I want to know about that. Please flag me. So our system has the ability to flag those types of events, or to flag an unusual number of PIN attempts, all sorts of different events like that would qualify as anomalies or unusual operational issues that you'd want to investigate. Slowdowns, failures, you name it. And those can all be brought directly into your trouble ticketing system. They can be emailed to you. You can be paged out on them, etc. And finally, the goal is to catch all this stuff as it's happening and act on it right away and really compress that mean time to repair. There are times when we have to go back forensically and look for issues, look for transactions, find out what our exposure was to a particular type of event or issue. And so our system also maintains a very detailed archive of all of the recent transactions so that you can go back 3 hours or 3 days in time and see exactly what happened and see it at a very granular level of operational detail. And we've got certainly far more screens that can get you into a lot more detail on exactly how a transaction executes in its life cycle. And we'd be happy to show you those offline. So at this point, I'll hand back to Kambiz to talk through the other two dimensions of this customer view.
Thanks, Mark. So in keeping with that theme, and on the business side of things, we're looking at perhaps longer-term perspective of what's been happening in the business, what kind of card traffic we're seeing, as opposed to some of the operational, more real-time, reactionary stuff that you want to be able to respond to quickly, whether it be network, whether it be issues with the cards, the alerts that Mark talked about. Here we're looking at exactly the same data, essentially, but looking at it from the perspective of how do I improve my business, what information is relevant to making those decisions that I need to make. And I'll go through a few of those business examples. These, again, there's so many dashboards that could be pulled into this, and this is just a sample set just to get your mind thinking about the potential and what you should be looking at when you're trying to get a holistic view of that customer and the card analytics. So in this card performance dashboard, what we're looking at is a monthly view of our card transactions. Obviously, depending on what you want to look at, this could be done on a day of week type perspective, the time frame that we want to see, just validate what we're seeing from a credit and debit perspective. Being able to look at our average transaction amounts over a period of time. There's always going to be incentives to try and move people to use one type of card over another, just because of the cost associated with it to us, and being able to see that and monitor that can help us come up with strategies to perhaps shift people to one versus another. So in terms of some of the opportunities with rewards plans or co-retailer type marketing events, where you could try and shift some of these values to go to where you'd like it to be from a business perspective. And then also see on the right-hand side, we're showing what kind of cards usage we have, where these transactions are coming from, the type of transactions that are actually occurring, and what the sweet spot is. See a lot of high-value refunds in this example, whereas most of our purchases are in the $80 to $200 range. So looking at the usage of our cards and trying to understand the performance and really drilling down on that. Another perspective is to use this data, look at where we're having issues with our users. So our cards are being used at ATMs, swiped at point of sale. They might be used in different circumstances, but we're always going to have some failed transactions for whatever reason that does occur. So with this dashboard, you have an overview of, over time, how we're doing as far as declines or transactions that aren't approved, and also see that from a regional perspective. Where do they fall across? Are there hot zones? Are there particular cities or even zip codes where we have particularly high number of failures, issues, where it directly correlates to the frustrations of customers that they might be having? And being able to address the frustrations from an operational perspective in some of the real-time stuff Mark talked about means we can react to it quickly before we get those phone calls, whereas here we're looking at how are we doing overall, are we improving our operations, and are there problem areas that we should be focusing on. And then another perspective of this data when you're looking at the business usage is every transaction with it also has your merchant category codes. So here we're able to see our customer base, where do they spend their money predominantly when it's at a point-of-sale terminal. What kind of merchant are we talking about? If you look on the top left-hand corner as well, you have the ability to go down and read the merchant information fields as well, find out exactly who the merchants are. Here we've shown what those categories are and the associated value with this. Now you could potentially look at the value predominantly, and through your marketing and through your card initiatives, you might want to take another step further and look into relationships with some of these categories that you see so predominantly, or ones that aren't necessarily the case, to try and boost up, just to match what the industry benchmarks are and what you want to be able to do. Again, lots and lots of different examples. You can look at these things from the notion of individual customer behavior. Where is a single customer that I might be looking to promote to, doing exactly? Of course, it's all anonymized data. You could be looking at the types of interactions people have. If there's multiple transaction sets that go hand in hand, usually a pattern comes up. You'd be able to figure those kind of things out. Really, with the underlying transaction data, the options are pretty vast, and these are 3 examples of looking at it from a business perspective. So hand in hand with these 2 things, obviously, is the risk, security and risk perspective. So let's look at also 3 examples here of some of the things you might care about. And again, the same underlying data, trying to see issues or large volume transactions that could cause some area of concern. Now, this could be some of the stuff that happens in real time and triggers that we saw with the operational side. Here I'm showing some of the trend analysis. So what we're looking at on the left-hand side here is defining a period. In this case, it's a 16-day period in May, and we're only looking at daily windows and trying to see when individual customers have more than 7 transactions in a single day. So our list, actually, if you look at that, there's a scroll bar on the side. We've got enough people that fall into that category. And if you, down the left-hand side are those, I'd mentioned, anonymous, unique customer IDs, and associated with each is a list of days, or in this case, spans, where they actually exceed that 7 transactions per day. So the second customer that you can see has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 different days where they exceed that transactional count. And by clicking on any of those spans, any single individual day, I'm able to see on the right-hand side all the locations that these transactions happen. Now, this happens to be a card usage on an ATM example, so you see all the individual ATMs that were touched in a single 24-hour period, as well as across the bottom, all the different withdrawal and deposit transactions that occurred different hours of the day, throughout the day, with that card, with that unique customer. So just another example of potentially situation you might want to investigate and look into, in particular the customers that appear more than once in that list. A couple of different examples, one being ATM suspicious transactions, and now the focus we've shifted, yes, on the card activity, on the unique card inserts, but it's from an ATM perspective. So we've got our list of ATMs, we see that on the map, and again, you pick a time period of relevance, what you're looking at, and then set up a threshold of how many transactions you want to actually drill into and look at for suspicious behavior. Now, there's a line across there that shows the average number of transactions, and it's around 250, and here we're trying to look at situations where we have ATMs over 400 transactions a day. And in the time period that I've selected, these blue dots represent an ATM that actually broke that 400 transaction threshold 4 times in that period. Now again, in that scenario, that's really high ATM usage. I'm able to drill into a single day, and that's what you see on the right-hand side. You see an hourly view of the type of transactions that actually occurred. On the top right-hand corner, you see the trend in that traffic, as you'd expect, the peaks around lunchtime and in the afternoon. But you also see the early morning, that red transaction being so wide, that's a really high value transaction that occurred essentially in the middle of the night. So again, being able to drill down, figure it out from an ATM perspective, identify who that unique customer is, do some more research to ensure that that suspicious behavior, suspicious activity is indeed nothing to be worried about. Or is it? One more example to wrap this up in terms of some of these security. And here we're looking at, again, the ATM perspective, but it's on value. And if you look across the bottom, we're trying to filter out over $100,000 in transactions on a single ATM per day. And again, we have one ATM that has significant instances of that happening. There's 6 different days where it happened in our 2-week period. And then when you look to the right, again, you see that these transactions actually happen throughout the day. There's no significance of when it's happening. There's a really large deposit towards the end of that day that we're looking at, but predominantly the withdrawals are the green bars that you see are scattered throughout the day, and it's happening quite a bit. So same data, looking at it from different perspectives, bringing it back to kind of a holistic view. Really, that data comes into play where you want to look at it from the business, the security, the operational aspects, and what we're trying to see. So with that, let's head over to our last question here, and I will pull that up.
Excellent. Thanks, Kambi. So this is just an opportunity to talk a little bit about, based on what we've shown you in the card analytics side, we're really interested in this is kind of going back to where we started with our whole about where you are in your analytics life cycle, trying to understand where your priorities are with respect to card analytics and where this fits in your overall business strategy for the year. We'll leave that poll up for a couple of minutes. I think what we're interested in here is, have you already deployed a card analytics solution? Are you in the process? Is this a plan for the next 6 months or the next year, or other, meaning we haven't got the time frames right here and there's something else entirely? Okay, so wait a second for the results to stabilize here.
If you, it is a little bit confusing maybe with the other field, which is why we said please enter it in the question box. So if you do have a vote for the other, we'd be really curious to see what time frame you're thinking or what that means.
Okay, we'll leave this one open as we move along and move into the summary. The last point I think we wanted to make, we've spent most of today talking about card analytics, which is a really important piece of our overall strategy here at iNetco, which is to make sure that we have a great card analytics solution for those of you who live and breathe the cards channel. But our ambitions and our abilities are certainly far broader than this. Really, we are committed to helping you handle all the data that's generated regardless of where a customer interaction comes from. So we really are an omni-channel solution for monitoring and analyzing customer interactions. So whether your customer's in the branch, at point of sale, at an ATM, interacting over a mobile device, they're generating a huge amount of data about their preferences, about their experience, and we're able to bring all that data together and give you, from an operations perspective, the ability to proactively monitor the quality of service. From a business perspective, be able to give you the on-demand analytics that you saw today. And from the information security or the fraud side, being able to help you really quickly detect anomalies and incidents and manage them more effectively. So I wanted to make this point for those of you who are coming from the card space. We've got a great specialized solution there. For those of you who are looking at us in a broader context, we're able to serve you from that standpoint as well. And finally, at this point, we'd like to open things up for questions and answers. There is a questions tab within the interface. We've seen a couple of questions come in as we've gone along, so Kambiz and I will work our way through these questions.
And also, as you're going through this, right below in the questions area, there's also a rate this button there. So we'd really appreciate to get your feedback as well on this webinar and what you thought so far. But without further ado, the first question here is, do you have data from the ATM systems?
Yes.
That is a simple answer. Absolutely. And if you recall back in the presentation where we looked at the transaction data being everywhere, our data streaming capture platform can actually listen in on all the different links in terms of where that data is relevant. and we could look at the host side, just looking at the card transactions that we have coming in, or you can look at the ATM side where you not just see your on-us transactions, but you see the other transactions as well. And if you go to our website, actually, there's some really good information in terms of the ATM dashboards and data and systems that you can actually see on that. Okay, let's look at one of the next questions. Can we get a copy of the presentation slide deck? So the recording is going to be available, and you can download it and rewatch it, and the slides will be included as part of that. There'll also be some other content as well that goes out after this to kind of capture some of the stuff we talked about. Let's look at the next question. How do you integrate with all the data sources? Mark, do you want to answer that one?
This is one of the really unique and sort of most powerful parts of our platform, which is the ability to capture data across any channel and do that in an environment agnostic way, I guess would be the best way to put it. So we're typically capturing this data off of the network as it moves between the various components of the application. So whether that's between an ATM and a transaction switch, between a network feed and your authorization switch, et cetera. We're capturing that transaction data off the network, and I won't get into a lot of detail on how that works, but what it means is you can typically have our system installed and collecting data within a week or two, and there's no custom integration required to your transaction switch, to your application, to your ATMs to capture this data. It's essentially capturing data that's already freely available on your network.
Thanks very much. A few other questions here, so let's try and get through as many as we can. How do we use the anonymized credit card data for looking at customer analytics, and where does the unique customer ID come from? I can take a stab at this. So as the data is coming in, we look at, obviously we have the full PAN information of the cards that are coming in, and at that point, before we sanitize the data and get rid of all the sensitive information, we create a one-way hash that represents that customer that is unique, and then we use that unique ID throughout the system to be able to look at the transactions pertaining to that particular card and that customer. There's no way of reversing that and going back to the actual customer PAN, so that information's lost, and it keeps it completely secure and anonymous in that way. And that way we can see customers' behavior throughout. So as well, just to make a point, you have our email addresses and different ways to get a hold of us. So if there's something that you wanted to follow up on, I see some questions about following up regarding perhaps different clients that might potentially be able to use this. So by all means, either send myself or Mark an email, and we can take that conversation offline. Another question here is, I'm a financial institution. Do you capture, and if yes, are you authorized to share with me the data of non-customers using my ATMs?
Yes, so we can definitely spot non-customers using your ATMs or not on us transactions, and we can give you the details on, looking at the BIN number, what institution they're coming from, et cetera. So yes, a fair bit of granularity there. Similarly, on the flip side of that, if you have data coming into your switch from foreign ATMs, so your cardholders going to some other bank's ATMs, we can also capture that stream and show you that. So you can kind of pair those two together, and that provides a pretty interesting view of what's going on.
Thanks, Mark. So here's another question. What is the biggest data processed, near real-time and batch in total on analytics so far? You can also define it as the channel size of the biggest customer using it today.
So our largest customer from a channel perspective is a merchant acquirer who has about 350,000 merchant locations. So that would be the largest from a point-of-sale standpoint. For that question, maybe it's best to follow up by email so we can get at, is there a particular environment you have in mind or particular type of velocity you want to check with us.
Right. So we'll probably go another 3 minutes or so answering some questions and then wrap it up unless the questions dry up. But here's a new question saying, in the countries where the data has to reside in the country and cannot leave, do you have the options to install at the client side? Yes. All of our solutions are available in an on-premise model, and all the data is kept locally in your data centers and doesn't have to leave and would be configured there. We, in fact, have customers across the globe in very, very interesting scenarios. So feel free to reach out to us if you want to learn more about your country in particular. This is an interesting question, quite technical. Does running iNetCo have an adverse performance implications on processing transactions?
No. So the way that we capture the data off the network essentially is out of band, and it doesn't slow the transaction down. Basically, your routers are doing the work they do. They're sending the packets out a different way, and there's really no overhead to doing that.
All right. How do you deploy SaaS or on-premise and on-premise? Yes. We have both capabilities. The data capture would have to happen on-premise as that data is going through your transaction switches, but the analytics could be done through the cloud offering and the SaaS model. Okay, let's do a couple of other questions here. What other data can be ingested into analytics besides the transactions? So depending on the use case, that information can vary what you want to look at. We've had, obviously you saw an example of where merchant category codes were inserted. We've had scenarios of customers wanting to put in their own client engagement information onto their map so that they can overlay the usage of the cards or the ATM data onto the client density and the client engagement. We also provide, maintain a few data sets like bin lists and ATM locations so that as you're evaluating, say, the types of cards that are being used on your network or other cards within your other channels, you can see what types of cards they are, what banks they're from, and also look at where ATMs exist on a map as you're evaluating where the transactions are coming from. One more question here. We'll look at, can you prompt them to download the attachments? So there is an actual attachment as well below the presentation here. So if you liked what you saw here, you can go and download the Omnichannel Solution attachment below. And also please give us a rating for this webinar. All right. There's a question, one final question. We'll wrap it up as we're 10 minutes to. That was our deadline. Mark, how about you answer this one? Are you partnering with Fiserv or any other core?
So we do have a number of different partners that both resell our software as well as act as systems integrators around the world. We are partnered with Fiserv and with NCR. Just to pick two names out of the hat, but a number of others from a regional standpoint as well. The question was interesting on the core side. We don't need to have any direct integration to the core to capture the type of data that we're capturing because we are pulling it off of the network. And if there's a follow-up question on that one, happy to take that by email. You'll see our email address on the summary slide, and you're welcome to ping me if I didn't quite get that question the way that you wanted it.
Okay. Well, don't forget to rate this webinar, and thanks to everyone for attending. It was hope you have some good takeaways from this. Thanks a lot.